I like to start my apologies because my English is not very good. I'm for the multimedia conditions of our presentation. My colleague Daniela Carvajal will participate through pre-record videos and via Zoom for the question session. Finally, our presentation is written in English. I will speak in Spanish, my native language, to better communicate my ideas. Entonces, disculpen, voy a empezar a hablar en español de forma lenta para tal vez los que entiendan el portugués sea más fácil. Queríamos empezar con esta pregunta sobre los museos, cómo los museos podrían sostener la vida. Lo que buscamos es analizar el proyecto específico de becas de co-creación para pares comunitarios y espacios de coaprendizaje que se llevó a cabo en 2024 por el equipo de la Jefatura de Espacio Público y Mediación Comunitaria de la Fundación Museos de la Ciudad, que se encuentra en Ecuador, exactamente en la ciudad de Quito. Esto surgió a partir de un profundo cuestionamiento sobre las políticas de participación de los museos dentro de esta institución. Para comprender mejor de qué tipo de institución les estoy hablando, creo que es importante entender que la Fundación Museos de la Ciudad está ubicada en Quito, Ecuador. Es una institución público-privada que gestiona 5 museos. Estos son el Museo de la Ciudad, el Museo del Carmen Alto, el Museo Interactivo de Ciencias, Yacu Parque Museo del Agua y Centro de Arte Contemporáneo. Estos museos son los museos más grandes que tiene la ciudad. Desde hace más de una década ha incorporado el programa de mediación comunitaria como un eje transversal de su trabajo. Esto creo que es importante establecer, ya que es una institución que va algún tiempo pensándose sobre estas dinámicas y cómo tensionar las relaciones entre museo y comunidad. Pero cuando hablamos sobre mediación comunitaria en la época de nuestra gestión, me gustaría preguntarnos a qué nos referimos. Y nos referimos a las formas de hacer y pensar que permite a las comunidades y museos involucrarse en procesos colaborativos a través de codiseños de proyectos culturales y procesos de investigación-acción, basándose en la escucha y el reconocimiento de intereses y potenciales compartidos. Ahora voy a poner un video de Daniela que explica sobre las premisas de las bases para las becas de co-creación, desde dónde surgen y cuáles son esas preguntas.
Good morning to all. It's an honor to be able to share this presentation with you today. I want to apologize in advance for reading my presentation because my English is not the best. So we began our work period at the Fundación Museos de la Ciudad, FMS, in the first half of 20, ending 22, at an assembly attended by representatives of nearly 20 community-based organizations with whom the FMC collaborates. One participant challenged us, pointing out that the museum used them, extracted information, invite them to workshops, organize events and exhibitions, occupying their time voluntarily, and that this did not directly translate into benefits for them, nor did it contribute to improving their weak subsistence economies. The content of their claim updates all debates we had already observed, read, reflected on, and debated many times. It forced us once again to look at the contradictory way in which our proposals and narratives are found on one hand, and on the other, an institution that, as much as we want to avoid it, continues to be colonial and extractivist, even though it tries to camouflage itself behind critical and participatory discourses. Their claims show us how the museum continued to function as a center that sought to serve peripheries, that is, as an institution that produced and offered services for certain groups. This implied a very low level of incidence of community actors in pre-designed activities in which they were invited. So, the peer community scholarship program was an effort to conceive an institutional policy that would allow us to radically question these interventionist and welfare models from which the Foundation's museums were constantly escaping. The project arose under three premises. 1. To conceive a policy of redistribution and cultural equity that tends to care the collective, focusing on processes and not on events. Decentralization not only negotiates and agrees on the content of an exhibition or a workshop, but also tries to yield and negotiate the very terms of the institutional policy, that is, decision-making on budgets, times, formats, and content. It conceived of community peers as agents. The second is to bet on a museum that listens, that is willing to create collectively with community actors, not for them. So, how, in a world conditioned by the fulfillment of indicators and goals with administrative procedures and inflexible deadlines, could a proposal be conceived that focused on the maintenance of community to take on the challenge of learning and deepening the discussion on the community support of life, non-competitive, collaborative economies, and solidarity networks? So, how can we imagine forms of economy that are neither individual or individualistic? How can we escape from competitive precepts and move toward collaborative ones? How do we learn together about reciprocal economies beyond the strictly monetary? What mechanisms and relationships of trust do we need to create so that we can manage the resources we need with a sense of collective well-being? And finally, how do we promote that these learnings remain autonomous and do not create relationships of dependency with state institutions?
Como mi compañera lo anunció, el programa de becas se realizó a través de una convocatoria pública. Se otorgó el apoyo a 5 becarios, quienes colaboraron con los 5 museos de la Fundación. Quería explicarles un poco sobre primeramente cuáles fueron esos requisitos para aplicar, cuáles eran los criterios de elegibilidad. Entonces, buscábamos que sean un grupo de personas o organizaciones o colectivos que hubieran participado ya activamente en relación con los museos, los 5 museos de la Fundación, por lo menos los últimos 5 años a partir de la fecha que se lanzó la convocatoria. Estas actividades deberían ser vinculadas a los museos de la Fundación a través de la Jefatura de Espacio Público y Mediación Comunitaria. Son a estos grupos a los que a continuación nosotros denominaremos como pares comunitarios. La idea es que cumplan los 4 siguientes requisitos. El uno es que tengan realmente una participación activa en un proceso de organización comunitaria, que se piense la sostenibilidad a largo plazo de la propuesta, que garantice una estructura de acciones pensadas para ello y no que sea eventos aislados. Y el compromiso con la diversidad e inclusión de su trabajo colaborativo. Es esencial también el enfoque de bienestar colectivo, priorizando el fortalecimiento de capacidades organizativas sobre los beneficios individuales. El programa tuvo una duración de 1 año desde que fue lanzada la convocatoria y terminó su ejecución. Y la fase de implementación de los pares comunitarios en los museos duró 6 meses. Durante este periodo, los becarios participaron de un espacio de coaprendizaje. Para nosotros, este espacio fue fundamental frente a lo que Daniela mencionó sobre las premisas con las que partimos para idear estas becas. Ese espacio fue diseñado como una plataforma para el intercambio de conocimientos, el desarrollo de habilidades y la colaboración entre los pares comunitarios y los equipos de los museos. Metodológicamente, lo dividimos en 2 líneas temáticas, 2 enfoques conceptuales y optamos por no generar contenidos específicos prediseñados, sino a través de una asamblea con los becarios, colectivamente definir cuáles serían esos contenidos para ese espacio de intercambio de información y conocimiento. Las líneas temáticas, como fue dicho, fueron 2. La una es explorar las economías colaborativas. La otra es compartir herramientas de gestión cultural y comunitarias para establecer la autonomía y el crecimiento organizativo de los pares comunitarios. Los enfoques conceptuales fueron la interseccionalidad, la creación de espacios seguros y libres de violencia. Como se dijo, una vez seleccionados los becarios, se convocaría una asamblea y se definiría de manera colectiva los temas específicos que se abordarían dentro del espacio de coaprendizado, utilizando las bases de estas líneas temáticas y enfoques. Además, la Jefatura de Espacio Público y Mediación Comunitaria estableció un comité de acompañamiento de los becarios, encargado de brindar orientación y apoyo y sistematización a las experiencias del programa. El proceso de postulación contó con unos talleres informativos previos a que los postulantes puedan entregar su propuesta, en donde se realizaron asesorías técnicas sobre el desarrollo de sus propuestas, un seguimiento de metodologías de diseño colaborativo de proyectos y se utilizó algo que consideramos novedoso, por lo menos en nuestro país, introducir un formato alternativo para la presentación de la propuesta. Este formato piensa que además de la postulación escrita, los candidatos podían enviar una versión en audio o audiovisual. Esta medida creemos que reconoce que todos los pares comunitarios no tienen el mismo nivel de escritura o formación académica y la flexibilidad en los formatos buscó eliminar algunas barreras que podrían haber en el acceso a las becas. En la selección la propuesta inicial contó con 3 etapas. Una era la revisión de admisibilidad, que era un espacio para verificar que los postulantes habrían cumplido los criterios de elegibilidad en la convocatoria. La votación entre pares, que es una etapa que nosotros consideramos esencial y que en la revisión de las bases fue juntada con la tercera etapa, que es la decisión final del jurado, en donde la votación entre pares permite que los propios postulantes participen en una sesión de presentación donde revisan todas las propuestas enviadas y mediante una votación secreta eligen el mejor proyecto, lo cual con la condición de excluir el votar por su propio proyecto. En el principio colocamos la tercera etapa como la decisión final del jurado, un jurado tripartito que tomaba en cuenta el resultado de la votación entre los pares y seleccionaba a los beneficiarios. Pensar sobre la votación entre los pares nos sirvió como herramienta de evaluación, pero también como un espacio de construcción de redes, fomentando la colaboración, la solidaridad y el reconocimiento mutuo entre los participantes. En muchos casos era la primera vez que se generaba un espacio de encuentro de ese tipo, a pesar de que sean proyectos que venían trabajando muchísimos años ya con la fundación, pero con diferentes museos. Finalmente, se colocó dentro de las bases que los beneficiarios de una edición no podrían postular a la siguiente edición y que deberían tener un periodo de descanso. Sin embargo, esos beneficiarios o becarios serían invitados para participar como parte del comité de acompañamiento y involucrarse en futuros espacios de coaprendizaje, donde podrían compartir sus aprendizajes y experiencias.
The women's organization called Las Veces, which in Spanish is a diminutive of neighbors, won the scholarship that corresponded to the Contemporary Art Center. They are indigenous women who have migrated from the countryside to the city and now live on the urban-rural border of Quito. They collaborate and take care of the garden of the Contemporary Art Center. In addition, they have a long history as neighborhood leaders, and they recognize the importance of women's economic autonomy in the face of the multiple oppressions and violence they face. Within their community urban garden project, they began a new phase to implement oyster mushrooms farms under a cooperative production model called Warmicelio. Warmi means woman in Quechua. The scholarship helped them to implement greenhouses, strengthen their brand, develop their image, social networks, and began to produce the first mushrooms cultivated in the garden of the art center and in their homes. As part of the community programming of the art center, Las Veces teach workshops and participate in various cultural events.
Creemos que frente a todo lo que se ha ido exponiendo sobre las becas, es importante entender que este trabajo intenta dialogar con algunos referentes teóricos que nos permiten ahondar sobre precisamente una pregunta que para nosotros nos parece clave, que es ¿qué otras formas y espacios se pueden imaginar para la producción del conocimiento? Desde una perspectiva de la desobediencia epistémica de Minolo, este enfoque creemos que cuestiona la dominación y centralización de los discursos en los museos, proponiendo un lugar de una mayor escucha activa y toma de decisiones compartidas. Asimismo, desde el concepto de corazonar de Patricio Guerra Arias, se apuesta por un pensamiento que entrelace la razón y la emoción, el afecto y la memoria colectiva, sirviendo como base para el diseño de programas educativos y comunitarios. Finalmente, en este marco, pensamos que los pares comunitarios no los podemos ver como receptores pasivos de una oferta del museo, sino como agentes activos en la configuración de estos espacios. El concepto de cuerpos generadores de Judith Primo y Mario Montiño, los posiciona como sujetos capaces de desafiar, tensionar y transformar el rol de los museos como productores de conocimiento. Esta dinámica exige que los museos cultiven una mayor apertura a la escucha, replanteen sus prácticas y retroalimenten sus políticas, reorienten sus políticas, avanzando así a un enfoque afectivo, territorializado y descentralizado. Esto implica reconocer su responsabilidad en sostener economías colaborativas y comunitarias, el bienestar colectivo y las condiciones que permitan la sostenibilidad de la vida. En este sentido, pensando de la mano de Amelia Pérez Orozco, nos colocamos sobre cuáles son esa vida que merece la pena ser vivida.
So, how museums could sustain life? This project pushes us to think more deeply and critically about the participatory discourse, which sometimes relegate the influence of community actors reinforcing hierarchical and centralized practices. However, we recognize the distance between what we said and what happened in reality. It is pretentious to think of a decolonization of the museum based only on this experience, but on the other hand, the achievement is to try to reverse certain logics, to open different paths to imagine new ways of doing things, but which on many occasions do not manage to structurally modify the functioning of the institution, and much less affect its practice in a substantial way. As Alejandro Suarez, our friend, said, we recognize that we are still in the entrails of a monster, of a genealogically colonial institution. The bureaucratic rigidity for the execution of limited funds is presented as a dissonance for the principles of the project. Nevertheless, the public call and competition format is counterbalanced by accessibility and learning in the first training phase, and the peer voting also, and finally through the co-learning space. Therefore, we believe that a central idea in the construction of the scholarship and in the co-learning is the notion and predisposition to unlearning, understanding that thinking about the coloniality of museums implies unlearning traditional ways of approaching knowledge. This not only requires integrating affectivity and reason, but also questioning the hegemony of rationality as the only source of knowledge. And in addition, it implies seeking collaborative and community ways of sustaining life. Thank you.
I finished. Hemos terminado.
Hello, everybody. So I'm bringing you a presentation about that came forward through this collaboration protocol between the University of São Paulo, the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, and the Institute of Contemporary History of the University of Évora. It's a part also of that comes from the outputs a bit of deals with some of our research done during the TRANSMAT Project. That in the TRANSMAT Project we documented collections of transnational origin, meaning collections that came from outside Portugal, in two archaeology museums founded in the 19th century, a national museum, the National Museum of Archaeology in Lisbon, and the Santos Rocha Municipal Museum in Figueira da Foz. So today I bring you a bit of what came out of this research in this collaboration protocol, which also involved the collaboration of the museums that organized the collections and made available all the archives. And I will bring you this to talk a little bit about how a transdisciplinarity approach can forge new museological practices. Most importantly, as to open a space to raise questions, because we dealt with these collections, and so bring it as what questions come from studying these collections, from having a critical historical approach to these collections. Museum foundation principles designed by the scientific disciplines of the past, in our case 19th century archaeology, work as a legacy that operate in shaping present museological arrangements. And this is our problem, let's say. The narratives built by the museums during the 19th and early 20th century are often not acceptable today, because for what they reinforce. The museum knowledge about these collections, it's often incomplete, inaccurate, or insufficient to understand culture. So we come from this present problem as a need to transcend this discourse, and for that perhaps to transcend the authoritarian tone of traditional academic disciplines that have determined the museum rule. So transdisciplinarity, we bring it here to present it it's presented, or has been presented as a response to the complexity of contemporary problems that calls on forms of knowledge that are outside the academia. So, through this approach, we can think about how knowledge is produced in the museums, and how it can be produced in other ways. In terms of museum practice, transdisciplinarity means recognizing that other sets of experts besides scholars or outside the academia and museum technicians. But what does this mean? We come here today really to raise questions and to think about to propose steps, to propose beginning steps for other problems and other challenges. And in our situation from Portugal, precisely to ask questions to collections. In the context of colonial collections, a transdisciplinary practice can be seen as a dialogical practices that may foster these new ways of relating with the communities the object belong to, and addressing our colonial past, prompting new ways of thinking about culture in museums. So, bringing a bit of this history of the collections from Brazil in these museums where we are at, and to also elaborate a bit on these problems that we were talking about. So during the 19th century until the mid of the 1940 decades, the comparison room held this museum ethnographic section. Collections and artifacts, mainly from non-European people, but also from traditional Portuguese culture, from people from Alentejo, and from people from Buarcos here in Figueira da Foz, were displayed in this room. This room operated under an evolutionist and racialized perspective that looked at culture from a simplistic and reductive point of view, where these artifacts from Africa, America, and Asia were thought to be comparable with prehistoric ones. This approach operated in the organization of the ethnographical museum collection here, but also in other archaeological museums in Europe at the time. We are talking about the end of the 19th century. So in the museum room, the objects were accompanied by a label, that is what you see there, a very simple label that categorized them in relation to their collectors, the people that give them to the museum, often with very little information about provenance, the people they belong to, how did they call themselves, how they were used, what they meant. And most of the times, without any context of how they were acquired, most of the times, because in other times they come with that information. So in our research we see that the existence of collections classified as ethnographic in 19th century archaeological museums often signals context of historical violence against people from community like places from Angola, Timor, and Brazil. So to move a bit, so through the years then, it is possibly only around 1945 that with a new musicological proposal, the comparison room becomes the ethnographic room, meaning that there's a separation from the archaeological, the artifacts classified as archaeological are moved out of this room. However, these artifacts maintain the same designations and the same structure of sharing knowledge that was pinned by the museum founder in the 19th century. So within this collaboration process, we looked at the history of the collection to see what can we bring, how can we interpret this today. And a little bit of what can we bring when we look at this artifact that was identified as a chastity belt, a clay chastity belt when it entered the museum in 1893. This artifact has been requalified or readdressed. So we are thinking it about like in other ways. Once the research was done and we convoked the documentation and historical sources, well, we learned that this artifact may have been used in funerary practices. So. And also, from consulting these sources, we understand that the Marajó, the people to whom this artifact belonged, never had contact with the Portuguese. So how did this artifact end up in Portugal, in this museum? And if it was used in funerary practices, what happened to the person that used it, right? So from this example, as the Marajó people have disappeared, we also see that there's questions for whom we will never find answers, right? But moving on a little bit, continuing our questioning of the collection, we come to these two artifacts that were identified as pots or vases. The one on the right was identified as from the Torah. However, when Torah was written in another way, so the group that was called the Torah also never produced from the historical sources. There's no reference that they produce ceramics. So in the end, who does this artifact belong to? Did the Torah actually produce ceramics, and is it one from them? And so how can this object of such cultural significance have entered the museum? And to the one on the left, the Igaçaba clay, there's also a question of where was it made, because in the archive, the information we got was that it came from the state of Amazon. However, the research done by our colleagues raises question about how perhaps the people involved with the collection of these artifacts didn't really understand the geography and the diversity of the place. So we see that there's often a generalization of groups and cultural practices and misinterpretation of provenance, right? For example, we could also raise the question of how have these objects circulated, because they seem to come from very, very distant places. And furthermore, also, if we have questions of provenance, could a biochemical analysis of these artifacts help us clarify it? And also, is it right to do such analysis when we don't know the importance of this, the significance of these artifacts? Moving on to another case that was addressed in the National Museum of Archaeology, and this appeared as a pot in the museum, and the critical historical research showed that this identified pot is a ceramic from the Caigang group of São Paulo, Brazil, and it is associated with an historic moment of violence against these people. We can ask the question, how can different layers coexist in the same artifact in the museum? When we see this museum, and we brought you an amplified picture of it, we see a message. Who put this message in this artifact? The message reads something about Portuguese and Leite de Vasconcelos, the founder of the museum where the object is. And it says that somebody offered, there's the word oferece. So this is a powerful thing to look at, because we see how there's these different layers existing in the same place, right? Because what does it mean that it was offered if it was taken during a violent moment where the Caigang in 1912 were in this process of being what is in Portuguese aldeados. I don't know how to translate this word. So this is some questions that come from studying and looking at these artifacts. But another question comes from when Caigan people like the shaman Jorge, which appears here on our right, comes to see this spot, and she talks how she talks how in a very emotional way, of course, how it was produced by her ancestors, the technical sophistication process around producing such an artifact, the meaning that it has for her and for them. And of course, this is all information that is not there, that it was not there that is not part of how the museum has been communicating and thinking about this artifact, right? So and here we have this Jorge and also Suziel Elias de Melo that have working with archaeologist Neide Barroca at UNESP, looking at artifacts from Caigang, from the Caigang, and in this experience, what I've been transmitted is that, this experience of having Dirce Jorge talking about these artifacts and this memory, right? It's really powerful, and so how can this experience coexist with is today in the museum? How can the museum foster a dialogue and open spaces for these talks, for these memories? And if museum preserves or thinks about culture, how can it do it? Preserving also perhaps this meta memory, the present memory, right? The present memory of absence as well, of the absence of what does it mean, the absence of these spots for the Caigang, and how can it how can they keep the story if it's not there, right? So coming from all these questions. But also, what's the role, right? What's the role of this George, the shaman from Kaigang, and other, we call it here community experts. Perhaps it's not the best way to identify, but coming, yes. So how can they reframe collections and practice? Well, and to finalize, we wanted to live with this image. So these two museums in the 19th century, when they started with the founder of the museum and the collectors producing the information about the artifacts, presenting it in a certain way, and through a transdisciplinary approach, we can talk about a knowledge practice in the museum that involves multiple actors and other ways of making knowledge, other ways of thinking about culture. So I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Eva Namasoke, and I'm from the Fitzwilliam Museum at the University of Cambridge. And my question is for the TRANSMAT team. So you talked about community experts and perhaps that not being the right term. So I was wondering if you're playing around with other terminology that you think could be a stronger way. Yeah.
Obrigada. Elisabete vai me ajudar com a tradução, até porque eu desenvolvo desde 2010 trabalhos com povos indígenas no Brasil. E é um trabalho que apresenta uma complexidade bastante grande em todos os sentidos e me envolve também profundamente.
I will translate. Professor Marília works from since 10 years. She's working with communities in Brazil, and it's a very moving work, and that requires a lot of sensibility and, well, of course, respect and mutual respect and building a relation and building trust process.
Eu agradeço muito a sua questão, porque isso implica na nossa posição dentro da transdisciplinaridade. Então, como é dentro da transdisciplinaridade, numa perspectiva de um trabalho colaborativo, que é o que eu desenvolvo, nós que somos ou profissionais dos museus, ou investigadores da universidade, do meio acadêmico, nos relacionamos com os grupos produtores dos objetos das coleções.
As Professor Marília applies this transdisciplinary methodology that involves the relationship with the local communities. So, as a museum professional, she is struggle to understand and spend a lot of time with the communities to better implement and co-create knowledge.
So, hoje nós já falamos de cocriação, coaprendizagem, divisão de espaço, compartilhamento de espaço. O que nós ainda não falamos, talvez, é de copesquisa. Então, copesquisa é realizarmos pesquisa numa perspectiva transdisciplinar e de uma forma colaborativa com outros agentes.
Professor Marília wants to stress that besides sharing space, sharing time, there is also this understanding of co-research with communities.
Nesse sentido, é fundamental nós repensarmos o conceito de autoridade. Então, eu diria autoridades. Nessa perspectiva, quem são as autoridades? No museu onde eu estou trabalhando, por exemplo, tem o reitor, tem o diretor do museu, tem eu mesma, que sou uma investigadora, e outros investigadores. Mas, na perspectiva transdisciplinar e colaborativa, um pajé indígena é uma autoridade, o cacique, que é o líder político da terra indígena, é uma autoridade. As pessoas mais velhas, os indígenas mais velhos, os anciãos, são autoridades. Os professores indígenas são autoridades. Então, e são muitas autoridades. Então, eu vou responder a sua questão de uma forma, a partir da minha perspectiva de trabalho. Eles são pesquisadores, né? Esses agentes indígenas são pesquisadores? Sim, não só nas suas culturas, como a partir dos projetos que nós desenvolvemos, mas na nossa relação de trabalho, sentamos na mesa e trabalhamos conjuntamente. Então, na perspectiva da pesquisa, né, estamos juntos e todos somos pesquisadores e pesquisadoras.
The question addressed is about, that must be addressed, is the question of authority, because Professor Marília works in a university and in a museum, and there is the director, there is the researchers, the technicians with their authority. But when we are working with communities, there are also the authority of the pajé, the leaders, the local leaders, and also the professors from the community, and they must engage as co-researchers.
Hello, I loved what you say about co-researcher for the healer woman, because indeed these persons has a strong agencies, as you have in your first talk on Ecuador. You spoke about agents, an agency which is a good concept, showing the power of naming, the power of knowing, and of changing, which these persons has, because of the practices, because of the connection with ancestors. So it is very rare, it's not happening so often that such co-research occur. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask to you about your presentation. I did not understand so well. It's a very interesting setting, what you have, but I didn't understand so well why about agriculture in the museum life. What is the point? I did not so well understand why the museum has this chosen this project, given that museum is collecting objects. So I would like to understand which kind of object, are the object of agriculture. I did not understand this connection.
Muchas gracias por su pregunta. Voy a hablarle en español y van a traducir en inglés. Entiendo que es complejo entender cómo se relaciona el museo con los proyectos de mediación comunitaria. No sé si você quer traduzir agora. De agricultura, la agricultura parte del interés de la comunidad que, no sé si es muy largo, pero justamente el proyecto que se realiza de agricultura que se mostró en el ejemplo, se realizó en el Centro de Arte Contemporáneo. El Centro de Arte Contemporáneo en Quito tiene una larga historia porque fue un espacio que primero fue construido como un hospital militar, fue abandonado y una época fue ocupado por personas sin hogar y mucho de su espacio exterior, para la parte exterior del museo, había proyectos de agricultura urbana que sostenían a la comunidad. Y cuando se construyó el museo, lo que reclamaba la gente es la pérdida del espacio de agricultura. Entonces, cuando uno escucha a las comunidades qué es lo que ellos necesitan, no les interesaba mucho el arte contemporáneo, les interesaba volver a tener su espacio para la agricultura. Fue así que ha habido un largo tiempo, más de 10 años, que se viene generando una tensión frente a eso y felizmente se logró abrir también una puerta que da hacia como la parte posterior y permite la conexión entre las exposiciones de arte contemporáneo con el espacio de agricultura urbana, permitiendo que esas personas que antes no tenían interés con el arte contemporáneo ahora encuentren un espacio de diálogo porque sus necesidades a priori fueron escuchadas. Entonces, a veces cuando trabajamos con comunidad pensamos que sabemos lo que ellos quieren, pero cuando los escuchamos son totalmente cosas distintas que parece que no combinan con el museo, pero combinan cuando podemos escuchar la historia del espacio.
Daniela was explaining that when the Contemporary Art Museum was built, the museum used a very extended part of the land. So people used to practice agriculture there, and they were not happy about this situation, about this museum. And they wanted to continue to have their agricultural practices. So the museum was forced to negotiate with communities and to understand what they want and to develop this space of dialogue and cooperation with the community, with the local community. So museum initially started to ask the community what do they want, and they started working together, and now there is a relation of the community with the Contemporary Art Museum.
So my name is Catarina Simão. I'm an artist and I work with archives from museums that have problems with their collections. So it's a short, I liked both presentations, but my question goes directly to Maria and the group that she represents. And it's not the first time I hear a presentation about your work here in this museum. And from the first time I heard the term comparison room, the solid comparação. And so now I know a little bit about what it means, but I wanted to ask if apart from the material elements that you work and research, you work or you would like to work also in the legacy of what was this learning device, if you would like to, or maybe you thought about how to work on the legacies of what this room meant in more immaterial ways.
But just answering this question about the comparative room, well, if we try to understand what it meant, and it was a research tool. It was well, the collector, the founder of the museum convoked all his friends, all his networks, people who were abroad, and who were living abroad, who were making commerce. Here in Figueira, what we came about, our conclusions is that this collection owns much to the commercial of the Navy practices. You know, so a lot of the donators of this collection were naval merchants. So we have here the donators, most of the donators of this collection are naval merchants and military men. It's different from the collection from the National Archaeological Museum. We studied both. And here, the Navy merchants are much more present than in the National Museum, where we can find more people connected to administrating colonial territories and also militaries. Here we have a big presence of these Navy merchants. And Santos Rocha were an archaeologist, or he was a lawyer, but he was interested in archaeology, as all archaeologists of that time had another occupation, and then they practiced archaeology. And they convoked this network. They were family members, they were friends, they were high society, part of a high society in Figueira da Foz. They had economic power, so they collected their own collections, and when the museum opened, they wanted to be part of the project, and they started donating to the museum. But the project of Santos Rocha, the founder, was using these collections, these objects from abroad, from Europe, from Europe also, but from Africa, from Asia, and from America, to understand prehistory. And this is what the collection meant. It was a tool to build knowledge about prehistory. And Katerina, I don't know if the question, this is the answer for your question. So we want to explain what this room existed. Yes, we want to. It must be explained that this room existed, what it was. But now I think it is a moment to explain this, but also to show the public of the museum, everyone who comes here, what is there besides this, and what is there is the colonial history and the results of Berlin Conference that forced many people to go to Africa and to implement the sovereignty under the territory and all these contexts. Maria, I don't know if you want to add something.
Just to add to what Elisabeth shared, we also did a bit of research on where is this idea coming from, right? The comparison idea. And there are 2 articles that we are about to publish in Manguinhos that talk a little bit about it. And so in the case of Santos Rocha, he mentions another archaeologist, Pigorini, in Italy, that founded a museum as well. Today it's called the Pigorini National Museum of Prehistory and Ethnography. It's from the same time, and he gets inspiration from him to build this idea here. But we think it's also in other museums.
Besides that, there is a fundamental work by John Lubbock published in 1965, if I'm correct, but it's around this decade. And the title of this book was Prehistoric Times, and the subtitle invoked the savages, people to understand prehistory. So the subtitle had this information very clear. And this book was edited 10 times after it was published the first time. So it was a big reference in the scientific environment in that time, and it influenced a lot of museum practitioners and influence, I'm sure, Pigorini, influence Santos Rocha and other archaeologists and museum managers around the world.
Temos poucos minutos. Eu não gostaria de perder a oportunidade para dizer que, particularmente a partir da minha perspectiva de investigadora, que esse lugar metodológico, que nós estamos chamando aqui de transdisciplinaridade, e eu trago e aproximo um outro lugar metodológico, que são os processos colaborativos. Eu gostaria, acho que é fundamental para a gente seguir numa discussão nesse evento, entender que esses lugares metodológicos, eles não são lugares ou lugar apaziguador, não são lugares harmônicos, não são lugares suaves. São lugares dialógicos, e como todo bom processo dialógico, o conflito está presente. E é fundamental que nós possamos lidar e aprender a trabalhar com o conflito. Se nós não nos debruçamos em processos dialógicos, entendendo que existem pontos de vista não só diferentes, mas muito diferentes, e que nós não possamos aprender a lidar, com esses pontos, eu acho que muito pouco avançaremos. Obrigada.
Transdisciplinary research methodologies, also a collaborative process of knowledge building. They are not quiet places. They are not peaceful spaces or moments. They're in these dialogical moments. There is conflict. There is different points of view, and we must accept it. We must connect with each other, accept these different points of view, and that's when change happens. And conflict has to be there also, because we don't think we don't think the same way. So I think that's it.
I have a broader question. And the question is, and it's to MARÍLIA and ADRIANA and DANIELA, I really appreciate and I'm impressed by your efforts to look for more equality between museum institutions in South America and local communities, which is very positive. And whereas in Europe, and I'm a European, we are more focused on restitution. Not only of war booty, but also what we say involuntary losses of possession. And my question to you is, how do you look at that debate, that development inside Europe? And are you aware of a moderately increasing willingness among European museums to restitute artifacts?
Desculpe-me, você falou em Europa, existe aqui uma realidade, então se vocês estão conscientes ou não, eu não sei. O que eu sei não existe caminho possível sem o diálogo. É isso que eu sei a partir do meu trabalho com os grupos indígenas. Quando eu comecei a trabalhar com os grupos indígenas, e a minha motivação era as coleções desses grupos que estão sob a guarda do museu onde eu trabalho, todo mundo me perguntava, todo mundo, modo de dizer, algumas pessoas engajadas em museus, autoridades, você não tem medo que eles peçam restituição ou repatriação? Eu falei, medo do quê? Medo do quê? Por que eu teria medo? Se o museu guarda, se o museu, na verdade, guarda aquilo que é da cultura deles. Então, qual é o medo? Bom, no decorrer de 2010 até hoje, eu te diria uma coisa. Esses mesmos grupos, o que eles pensavam ontem? Hoje eu não sei, porque eu não conversei com eles. Até ontem, eles sabiam o que é repatriação, restituição, eles sabiam que eles tinham direito a requerer, mas, para eles, enquanto o museu soubesse guardar bem e com respeito, e apresentar as peças com respeito na exposição, para eles estava bom, e muito pelo contrário, achava bom que a sua cultura estivesse naquela instituição. Até ontem. Hoje eu não sei, ele pode ter mudado de ideia. E também eu não estou aqui como representante de ninguém, eu só estou falando do meu trabalho, aquilo que na aprendizagem eu aprendi e que eu posso passar para vocês. Então, diálogo, repatriação e restituição pode ser a primeira coisa a ser tratada, como pode ser a última coisa. Depende da nossa capacidade, dialógica. Depende de nós. Sempre tem uma resposta ao contrário. Quanto mais aberto nós formos, maior possibilidade dialógica existirá. Eu não tenho dificuldade nenhuma com os grupos indígenas, da parte dele, em diálogo. Eles só querem um diálogo, então somos nós mesmos que temos que nos preparar para essa abertura dialógica e falar. Falar. Medo é a pior coisa que possa existir nesse processo. Não tem a pior coisa. A pior coisa é esconder. É limitar acesso. Nós, museus, profissionais dos museus, nós não podemos, eticamente, fazer isso hoje, século XXI, terceira década.
Well, from Marília's work, she was telling us that there is no possible way to do, there is no possible work to do without dialogue. When she started work 10 years ago with the indigenous communities in Brazil, people were asking her if she was not afraid. And if she was not afraid of restitution, if starting to work with communities will not be, the end will not be restitution. And these communities knew that they had this right to restitution, but they also understood that when the objects, the community with whom Marília worked with, what they tell Marília, what they tell her, was if their objects are kept in museums, but are kept with care, with respect, they think that's right, and they feel good about that situation. But communities, most of all, want to dialogue, wants to talk with people who has these collections, who belong to them and continue to belong in a certain way. And they represent and communicate their culture and their identity. Marília stressed the idea that the most important thing to do is to talk, it's to dialogue, to promote dialogue. And the worst thing to do is to limit access. It's not having transparency about what the museum has inside, what is the story of the objects, what documents exist in the museum that can be consulted by researchers, that can be shared with communities. So that's what we just heard Marília saying.
Should I talk?
And you want to introduce yourself,
my name is Rita Samarques. I work in several museums, and I'm here as a PhD student. And I heard a lot about the project TRANSMAT. And I don't know if I am wrong, but you spoke mainly about methodology, right? I'm very curious about conclusions, so to say. And when you, and that's for all of you, when you say dialogue, of course, I would like very much to know, in the sense of the ethnography of the work, how do the communities of your origin, so to say, deal with the archives, for example, the knowledge that we have preserved in the museum, either archives, our way of treating the objects, what was written about it, and the way it was written and everything. Do they have access to that, and how this change of knowledge, because the knowledge they bring, I have lots of examples, and you gave some examples, but I would like very much to know how these two visions, and I know, of course, there are conflicts, but I would like to know how these two visions work together, and mainly what do they learn with this, with our the museum knowledge.
I have a question regarding resistance, and that's to you, Marília and Maria. Have you encountered resistance working with the communities regarding engagement with the museum collections or the infrastructure of the museum framework on the one side? And the other question would be, I think, equally important. Have you encountered resistance within the museum regarding the collaboration with communities? And how, if there was resistance, how did that resistance look like? Thank you.
O trabalho colaborativo que eu desenvolvo e outros investigadores também, não só no Brasil, é de longo prazo. Eu diria que o que eu faço não tem prazo, porque o trabalho vai se transformando. Não é? Então, eu vejo claramente, olhando para trás, que alguns ciclos de questões que são formuladas em conjunto entre eu, investigadora em museologia, e os grupos indígenas com os quais eu trabalho, nós vamos gerando pautas de discussões a partir da perspectiva da relação entre museus e grupos indígenas. Então, o ponto é a relação a partir do museu, entendendo que um museu é uma instituição historicamente colocada numa perspectiva onde o colonialismo no passado e a colonialidade no presente ainda está fortemente colocada. Então, esse trabalho das relações é fundamental e é trabalhando junto, continuamente, e numa pauta comum. Não sou eu que defino sobre o que nós vamos falar ou sobre que projeto nós vamos desenvolver. Nós fazemos isso conjuntamente e é no desenrolar do trabalho que o trabalho se faz. Algo que é muito favorável é organização de exposições, porque puxa todo o fio do trabalho do museu e, ao mesmo tempo, atende uma questão fundamental, que é a visibilidade dos povos indígenas através dos museus, e os indígenas querem isso, respeitabilidade, respeito, através da visibilidade, e, sobretudo, que eles cada vez mais entendam que eles são agentes dentro do museu, que aquele museu é deles também e que o museu precisa deles, e precisa, principalmente, a partir da construção de autonarrativas, autorrepresentação, que são, de fato, contra narrativas colonialistas e coloniais que ainda permanecem nas nossas instituições, Não sei se eu respondi o que você queria saber.
Rita, answering your question about the work with source communities, here at our project, during these 4 years of work, most of the time our time were spent collecting information about the collections and trying to identify all historical sources about the moments of incorporation of these collections in the museums. So before we didn't know, we had, this is an interesting story to tell because it tells a lot about how this research started. But when we proposed the National Archaeological Museum and this local museum, this research project, we arrived and we told the team that was very kind and generous all the time that we wanted to research these colonial collections and try to understand the colonial presence of, the coloniality present in the museum. And we said that we want to study the donors and trying to identify if there are moments of violence associated with collections. And the answer we had in both museums were, well, you are very welcome, but I think you will be disappointed because all we have here are donations. So we have donations, so there's nothing wrong with it. But as I did, my area of research is history of science, and I worked with the object biographies before, and I had experience about it, so I knew that there are a complexity behind each object. So I was sure that they were not only donators, simply donators. So now in both museums, we reconstructed together with the museum teams and our fellowship holders, the biography of that donors. And most of them are colonial administrators and military men and merchants. So this is a work that it's not, it's hard to do because we have to convoke the museum archive and other national archives. So this is our point we finished these 4 years and we have this research done and we are ready to another step that is going to talk with the communities and collect information that will enrich the museum narratives and will allow the museums to tell other stories. And this is an answer to you. Marília talked about the work she's been doing in Brazil, and she was telling us that the work has not an end. That's it. Yes, because the most important thing is to get to discussions with the community and trying to find a common point that is that interests communities, is the community interest, but also and most part is the community interest that counts. They are the priority, if I understand well. So, and Marília doesn't define what is the subject to work. The community decides about that, and they are the authority. The museum needs their work, and they build in the museum. They are convoked in the museum to build self narratives. So they are making exhibitions, but they do the exhibitions, not the museum staff. They are the voice inside the museum and the voice of these exhibitions. That's it.
Thank you. Well, good morning to all. I'm very grateful to be sharing here with you and listening to you. Just to complement what Adriana mentioned, I would like to add that one of the cross-cutting community mediation projects we have worked on the last 10 years is urban gardens and urban agriculture. So all the museums have gardens, and they are worked on in collaboration with many organizations in the surrounding neighborhoods, as Adriana said. The garden in the art center is part of the guided tour and also connects with the work of the art center through exhibitions or educational programs. For example, on ecofeminism, on other topics linked to debates on environmental justice. So I would like to say also that another project that won a grant in these programs works with children in a market near the Water Museum. Another grant was awarded to an indigenous community to work with their ancestral memories. Another project, for example, worked with people with disabilities also in urban agriculture. So that to mention just a few examples of the work we do here in Quito. And we understand those projects as research process of knowledge production based on dialogue, but above all, on listening and decision making together with the communities. And this collaboratively builds knowledge that always influence the programming and the narratives of the museums. So I don't know if that let you see more specific the way we work with the communities in this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dani. She's around if you have questions. Probably, I think for now, we can give audience to Professor Siraj. Can you just...
Thank you so much, colleagues. What a beautiful discussion. It reminds me of time that I spent in Colombia, where you realize that the classificatory systems that we are used to sometimes do not apply in different Latin American countries, when the Jardin Botanico and the Zoologico are part of the museum. So you just have a different configuration of disciplines. It's an extreme honor and privilege that I have of working with Susanna Souza, who is a doctoral student at the University of the Western Cape, and who comes through the disciplines of art history and sort of cultural critique, and who is studying art history and the history of museum and of the discipline of the ethnological, or what is sometimes called in English the ethnographic, in Angola, where you have quite surprising manifestations of not just the perpetuation, but the intensification of the ethnographic under the rule of a socialist state. So where she's building an argument of how the MPLR relied on the ethnographic rather than contributed to the demise of the ethnographic, which is a project that for some of us is important, because in many places on the African continent, the ethnological is part of the tools of colonial domination. Part of her argument is trying to understand MPLR as a political movement kind of led by the logics that came from being assimilado and of being denativized through the assimilado process and of being turned into kind of black or mixed blood Portuguese. And part of that project also involved almost the invention of the category of the chokwe and of other categories that then have become whole categories in kind of African art history. And so, it's work in progress, and we see what comes out of that.
Thank you so much.
A comment and a question for Daniela, and also Adriana, if you want. Just first a comment to congratulate TRANSMAT and ELISABETE PEREIRA. Parabéns. You're doing a great work. And TRANSMAT now is, I'm sure you know that, yeah, it's here. I'm sure you know, but anyway, I'd like to stress that out. That it's a reference for everybody working in museums and heritage, not only scholars, not only in the academic field, not only even researchers in museums. So that's your doing, and we should, I think, not only keep coming to Figueira da Foz, but also to acknowledge your efforts, which is in the long term. It's really very good. And a question to Adriana or Daniela. So just coming out of your answer to the previous question, and I've been reading what's online in this the Fundación de los Museos de la Ciudad de Quito. And sorry for my ignorance about Quito and museums in Quito. I don't yet know them. But I was very much impressed by your in-depth reflection in the both of you in your presentation. Really very straight to the point in some of the issues that are kind of parallel to the discussion of this day. And I was also impressed by some words that are online, like now in Portugal again, sorry. The institution, the very museum of the city of Quito, aims to poner en tensión estructuras coloniales arrastradas por siglos, abogando por difundir historias no contadas en procesos de diálogos con colectivos, académicos y comunidades. So it's online, written black on a whitish page, that the museum seeks to underline tension between colonial structures and to communicate untold stories. Could you please give us only just a couple of very quick, I know we are kind of behind our time, but very quick examples of other projects other than the vegetable gardens at Museu de Arte Contemporâneo, just for us to have an idea of how you are developing this line of work. Thank you.
I will try to speak in English, but it is hard. I will mix it with Spanish, okay? I'm sorry. But community programs at the Fundación Museos de la Ciudad works now for 10 years. And today we have about 40 different processes during the whole year working with many community actors. So we have worked with some neighborhood organizations, but also, for example, with trans people. I don't know how to say trans. It's okay. Bueno, con personas trans. We also work with people with disabilities, and that project, for example, let us see how the collaborative work influenced the museum. Now, for example, the same Center of Contemporary Art has everything set up for accessibility, for accesibilidad cognitiva. I don't know how to say that in English. Let me see.
Cognitive accessibility, yes. So we have the pads and the signs on the walls for accessibility for people with disabilities. We also work with a lot of women organizations in different projects, most of them about violence, gender violence. We also work with students of different schools near the museums. And there are so many projects. I will took many time to explain you, but as you said, you can check online on our webpage and on our Instagram. Don't know how to say in an Instagram. For some more information, we actually have now a recent publication with the memories of the work during these last 10 years, that it's online also. You can find it on a webpage. I can let you here in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. It's in a page called ILA. ILA is one page, and the other is Comunidades en Museos, Community in Museums, but in Spanish, in Instagram. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I hope so.
Thank you. Thank our presenters for the insightful presentations.